Welcome back, everyone. I am the World Archivist, here to tell you the stories of the many realms of the multiverse. Today, we examine what happened on the 10th day of the Fangmoor. Armies shall mobilize, alliances shall be drawn, and the call of the Fangmoor shall reach a new climax. Now, before we begin, if you enjoy this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button and the little notification bell. They do tend to get a bit lonely. And consider leaving a comment as a sacrifice to the one true god of the Fangmoor, the algorithm. This all helps the channel immensely. And with that out of the way, on to the story. Moonchild, Norio called as he led the newer members closer, giving Moonchild a start. It seems you've been busy.
Ah, Norio. A pleasure as always,
She replied, a wide smile spreading across her face.
I trust this is a social visit.
Looks of puzzlement and bewilderment spread through the Ogroni ranks that only grew as she acrobatically climbed down the wrecked form of her mount. No. You talked about making a weapon to attack the willow. I had hoped that my friend here could enchant it, so that we may finally kill that creature, Norio said uncertainly, a surprised look flashing on Moonchild's face before disappearing.
The weapon?
She trailed off, her eyes glazing over for a second before snapping back to attention.
Oh, yes, the weapon. Sadly, initial research into the willow showed that a conventional weapon would be incapable of doing any real harm to its bark, so I opted against its manufacture. And further research is on hold until I can repair this mess,
She responded downheartedly.
However, while you're here, perhaps you can help. Take this.
She pushed a small rectangular object that rang out with a flash of light frequently into Norio's hand.
There is an area of fog I believe is linked to the willow up north. Take that as far into it as you can, and I should have a better picture of how to tackle our little problem.
Norio wanted to argue. They all did. But all they wanted was to be away from this bloody place. Away from the stench. Away from the slaughter. Away from her. Glancing one last time at the box, he responded with a growl and led the others off. Waving them off with a forced smile, Moonchild waited until they were out of view to walk around to the other side of her mech to look at the slumbering man she had nestled under the cover of her guardian. He was hers, and hers alone. To her credit, the direction that Moonchild had given them had proven accurate. The fog had appeared as they had expected, and after calming down Shigeko's plow beast, the gathered group had entered. As thick as broth. It was only thanks to what little light the stationary sun in the sky was able to push through that they didn't get lost. All the while, the box continued to flash and shout into the inky void around them. Despite their doubts, they pushed on, only stopping when the sound of snapping twigs revealed that they were not alone in this place. The group formed up, silently waiting to find out whether they would have to fight their way out. Thoughts circling back to the other oddities they saw when they first arrived in this place. However, what met them was far stranger. Before them stood a fellow Ogroni, fully equipped with the armor and gear afforded to an Ashigaru.
Oh, they're Ogroni now? Well, that's a first,
the figure said with a chuckle, shifting their gaze onto Norio.
Well, I know you're fake. You're missing your swords, aren't you? You goofy little ghost, you.
She walked up and grabbed his cheeks, a low growl escaping his mouth.
Oh, fuck you real!
She yelped, taking a step back and looking at the others. She tentatively reached for Kaeda's cheek before being slapped away. After a moment of joint confusion, the figure prostrated herself.
I'm sorry, my lord! Forgive me!
She pleaded. Norio let out a drawn-out sigh as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Maddened Ogroni appearing out of thin air wasn't even the craziest thing he had seen that day. Orienting himself, he finally spoke. What is your name?
My lord?
Your name. I am Yamida Norio. These are my fellows. He introduced his assorted warriors and turned back to the figure expectantly.
Ni Manarai, my lord,
she answered, gaining curious looks from the group.
I woke up in this fog, couldn't find my way out, and have been seeing all manner of spirits. Until I found you, of course.
Norio thought on the last point for a moment. A fog that summoned spirits was a dangerous thing, and for all they knew, the box they carried was a lure. Had that moonchild led them here on purpose? Or was all this a bad coincidence? Regardless, they couldn't stay here. He ordered Manarai up with a nod. I don't know how you got here, nor do I care. But it is not safe for you to wander these lands alone. So join us and help us save the shogunate. She nodded enthusiastically and fell in line as the group departed. Oh, no more pitching, please. Oh, it was a beautiful sight. The fort, which once belonged to those damned swamp demons, was cleansed of their taint. And from the rift they were able to create came the largest reinforcement army ever assembled in this campaign. And King Charles could see at the head of this force rode General Karl Gustav Armfeldt. The man gave off a veneer of professionalism in a fresh uniform and powdered wig, which he remarked to himself with amusement that wouldn't last long in this place. But fashion aside, he was more eager to examine the troops that had been brought along. Ranks of musketeers and pikemen arrayed themselves in ordered formations across the open ground as standards flew in the wind. Following close behind were dozens of heavy cavalry, the steps of their horses' hooves thundering through the fort as if echoing their righteous fury. And finally, entire batteries of artillery were brought in, the metal of their barrels glistening and ready for battle. Oh, the king was positively giddy. General Armfeldt beckoned his horse forward, approaching the king before giving a bow. My liege, it is good to see you alive and well, though it would seem the army is in less than ideal circumstances. Indeed, but with your reinforcements, I'm confident we can turn things around and strike back against our enemies. Tell me though, how are things back home? Very well, my liege. You will be pleased to hear that the Faith County Rebellion has been crushed. Most excellent! And the other fronts? Nothing to report, my liege. Very well then. Have your men get settled in, then see me at the command tent. I'll inform you of what has transpired here. We move out at dawn. Solemn shadows crept over the ashen forest floor. The wind howled through the dying branches of the once majestic willow. The song of the sisters' simulacrum echoed between the trees, barely heard, like a desperate wailing. Upon the bark appeared a soft-featured face. It looked at its visitors with a tender expression. Have you come to apologize? Have you finally seen the desolation of Silex's absence? They had not. Vega unsheathed the blade of the Ogroni, answered by laughter from the willow, whose face had shifted into the shape of a serpent. Oh, Vega, poor child. I have no throat to slit, no blood to drain, no flesh to eviscerate. Put away the blade before you hurt yourself. Your task is not yet completed. They stood silent in the gray sand that once was the forest floor. Then a dark shape stretched over the clearing, a shadow blotting out the imitation of a sun. With the face of a ram, the entity within the willow looked upwards to see the silhouette of the ultimatum Ternion, hovering above like ravenous hawks. A booming voice descended from the clouds, crashing into the dust with thunderous sound waves. Georgie Macqua, the Realm Eater, the World Leech! Your nature is revealed! Show yourself and surrender to the Lunar Pact or face the consequences! Such is the decree of High Commodore Antares of Dominion Insidion! The face of the willow writhed with disdain, then shifted upwards into the branches. Rot! Be forsaken! It screeched. How is it possible? You insignificant mites! May you all be devoured by the fog! Branches cracked, twisted, and sprouted slimy black feathers. The roots emerged from the ground, dripping with thick blood, revealing the shape of talons. A curved beak appeared from behind the trunk. Two shining white eyes following behind it. How can this be? How can you know? Damn it all! It matters not! I will find Silex myself, and you will decay alongside the Fangmoor! A missile impacted the entity. The ground shook intensely as the air was filled with the stench of tar and blood. A second impact, then a third. With each explosion, the willow resembled its own form less and less, until all that remained was a blackened pile of gore and shrapnel within the crater. When the bombardment ceased, the remains began reforming themselves. Its screams of hatred became louder and louder. The newly regenerated monster burst forth from the debris and spread its wings. Georgie Macqua flew off into the dying forest, rains of blood dripping from its talons. It left a surprisingly deep crater, the bottom of which was flooded with the blood and corpses of fallen warriors. The Realm Eater was loose. It was no longer acting on hunger, but on raw survival instinct. It was more dangerous than ever before. They were wounded. They were diminished. And above all, they were motivated by a single purpose. Gulta raised her staff, and the knights surged forward. They burst into the clearing, ready to hack the God Willow apart. But instead, the Knights of the Undermire were nearly knocked off their feet by a concussive blast. Two great beasts were dueling in the sky. One was a metal craft that rained missiles like bolts of lightning. The other was a twisted creature of branch and blood. Craters pocked the forest floor, but none larger than the charnel pit that lay where the willow once stood, where it had been feeding all along. The aerial battle quickly moved on, the flying fortress doing its best to keep up with the jinking willow creature. When the skies were clear, Gulta's knights carefully rose to their feet. During the chaos, they had been surrounded by warriors. Now all manner of advanced weapons and scanning equipment was being pointed at them. Gulta recognized the warriors from her first day in the Fangmoor. She had seen them consolidate their position around the willow with impressive professionalism. They were clearly intending to study the willow. But why? Judging by their battle, they weren't interested in protecting it. Were they trying to destroy it? Would that make them allies? In the face of the gun line, Gulta raised her helmet and introduced herself. In the distance, the Fog Heralds watched as the Carolean Royal Army scoured the swamp. Soldiers tore at the fortifications, and the fecund rift pool at its base was lost beneath pitch and flame. With this act of vengeance, the Undermire's divine influence would be once again diminished in this realm, and Gulta's knights would once more be vulnerable to the bonds of shadow. Morgan and Harold smiled and vanished into the night. The forests of Fangmoor, if that is how one thinks of them, are a closed system. For time immemorial, no visitors trod upon the ground, and no motive matter ever escaped the stasis of the wood. Now, endless footfall visits the mossy groves and clouded valleys, bringing with them war and devotion and energy. Energy of matter, energy of mind, and energy of spirit. Long dormant synapses begin to fire, and long sated appetites begin to crave anew. Before life, before death, there was nothing. Upon nothing grew everything, and the cycles of creation and destruction danced happily in their positions of privilege. But nothing remained, and nothing grew weary of the frenetic cycles of life and death. It longed for the return of perfect silence, of perfect nothing. So it sought to swallow all that was built upon it. Nothing found that things had changed, and now it was opposed. A billion tiny lives, all drinking the nothing's energy, had grown fat on its power. They called themselves gods. They wielded the primal powers of nothing. They would not be moved. Their realities were nothing's limbs, and their rifts were nothing's capillaries. They scurried among nothing's veins, and in time found nothing's tender tissue. Nothing was defeated. Nothing was imprisoned. Nothing was cloistered away. A being called Jarji Makwa built an engine. It kept nothing weak. It kept the gods strong. It required a pilot. A terrarium was built, and nothing was entombed in it, along with another. For countless eons, they built upon the succor of nothing, and how their towers grew. But now, the kingdom they built, gaudy as it is, has cracks in its foundation. There are those in the system who see the truth of it all. There are no gods. There is no real power. And the only future worth pursuing is the return to perfect nothing. Jarji Makwa has neglected the system, and it is weakened. Our allies feed us bodies and blood. The righteous mortals and their gods demand power, but they question not from where it comes. They have forgotten us, but we are always here. We are those below all else, and ours is the mouth that swallows up all. Silex couldn't remember arriving at the Fangmoor. Only the decree of their holy kin. Contain the void, they said, so that life may have a chance. And that's what happened. For eon after eon. Silex took to the willow and siphoned away the energy of nothing. The roots of the trees dug deep into the void, piercing its flesh and draining its vitality. The system leached the void of its terrible wrath, and sent the energy out into the rifts, so that life could have a chance. At the beginning of their tenure, Silex rarely visited the willow. The system was strong, and the roots burrowed deep. In time, however, the rifts asked for more and more, and the system had to compensate. The energies reserved for the Fangmoor spilled out into the rift, and Silex spent more and more time in the willow. Slowly but surely, the demand grew to outpace the supply, and no longer was Silex subduing the void, but instead they were exploiting. Silex toiled at the altar of the willow for millennia on end, sapping the void and feeding the rift, until they could abide no more. Silex split the trunk of the willow and stepped out into the system, as they had in ages gone by. If Jarji Makwa wanted more, they could come to the system and claim it for themselves. Sure enough, vassals were sent to coerce and contain Silex again. But the efforts of the Holy Kin were sabotaged by empathy. The new arrivals saw the system for what it had become. Unjust, unsustainable, a farce. Together, Silex and the mortals would put an end to this exploitation and would forge the system anew. The void would be quelled once more, and the roots of the Fangmoor would be fed their due share. Gods would suffer, surely, but they would do what had been asked of them. They would give the living, the mortal living, a chance. Before, it had no name. It was one of many, but it stood at the fore. It unified the creators, and it stood against the nothing. After, they called it Jarjimakwa, the first of the gods, and it was glad for it. Nothing was subdued, nothing was entombed, and nothing was controlled. A system was created to draw energy from nothing. A volunteer from among the deific stood sentinel over the nothing, sworn to protect the creators. This was the golden era, resplendent in its glory. But it would not last. How could it? Nothing fed the creators, who in turn created life. Life began its cycle, and through death claimed its share. Life pushed on. Soon, life created creators of its own, and gods begat gods. Deities produced worlds, and universes and realities. The system was expanded, time after time, and never again contracted. The living were thickened, but the system would abide. It had to abide. Now, the jailer has unlocked the cells, has tossed the key, has danced upon the ramparts. They forget themselves. They forget their holy kin. And they forget the cost of neglecting their duties. It is shameful that in such desperation, the only recourse left was the beckoning of mortals. But what else could be done? Creators only create, but the mortals are masters of destruction. Their acumen for making war would be useful for subduing Silex and returning them to the system. Should they die, they would perish in service of the creators, of the holy kin, of the deific. What cause could be more worthy? Unfortunately, Silex has not seen reason. Worse still, the mortals are divided, and some defend Silex over the system. It is time to act, lest it all fall prey to the void. Jarjimakwa will return to the Willow, will assume its form, and will guide the mortals to victory. For the life that is, for the life to come, and for all life forever. If you stayed around this far, thank you so much for watching. As you can already tell, things are going to get very interesting in the Fangmoor. Do let me know in the comments below who you are rooting for in this final battle. And be sure to tune in, as there will be more entries on the Fangmoor in the coming weeks. I hope to see you there.